Talent Talks, brought to you by the 4As and the 4As Foundation, where we shine a spotlight on leaders who are actively demonstrating ways to create inclusive and equitable workplaces. I'm Cathy Butler, EVP of Talent Equity and Learning Solutions. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to speak with Deb Wilson, Chief People Officer of Understood.org, the leading nonprofit organization focused on empowering more than 70 million people with learning and thinking differences. Welcome, Deb. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Cathy. I'm so glad to be here with you today. Thank you for inviting me. So, as you mentioned, I'm Chief People and Culture Officer at Understood. I've been here since May of last year, so a little over a year. And I have to tell you, I feel very privileged to be able to work here at Understood. I'm personally connected to the mission. My 29-year-old son has autism and ADHD. And so, over the course of time, being able to advocate and to support him, I certainly know and share some of the challenges of some of the people who I get to support now in this role at Understood. And then I'm also excited about this conversation because I spent 5 years of my career before joining. I was in your space. I was at Wonderman and then Wonderman Thompson as part of the WPP network. So I'm so glad to be here and to share any insights that I can with the 4A's audience.
Fantastic. I'm so excited for today's conversation. I've been thinking about it nonstop and really thrilled to dig into today's topic, which is to better understand how to support, foster an inclusive organization and work culture for those with learning and thinking differences. Before we get into it, tell me about Understood.org's mission and how does your work come to life?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, we are the leading nonprofit organization aiming to shape the world for difference. And we do that through providing resources for people with learning and thinking differences, including ADHD and dyslexia. 1 in 5 people, 20% of the population in the US, have learning and thinking differences. And we believe that that's probably a conservative estimate. So we help neurodivergent individuals navigate all the challenges that they have in order to gain more confidence and find support so that they can thrive in school, in work, and just in life. Our work focuses in 4 key areas. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're raising awareness. We educate the public about the challenges and the strengths associated with learning and thinking differences. We also are aiming to continuously reduce stigma, to break down some of the misconceptions and just false statements to help reduce stigma surrounding neurodiversity. We want to always try to build confidence. So through our resources, we're able to empower neurodivergent individuals so that they can embrace their strengths and navigate every step of their journey so that we can continue to drive advocacy to help people with learning and thinking differences be able to advocate for themselves as well as help others so that everyone can thrive again at school, at work, and then in life. We actually, Cathy, we reach 20 million people each year through our vast content library, including our website, which is understood.org. We have a vast podcast network, and then we also have an app that you can download. It's the Understood app that folks can download. And as I mentioned, I am personally passionate about our mission and really want to make sure that we are, doing the best that we can to raise awareness and just, keep this topic front and center.
That's amazing. I feel like Understood is one of the organizations that's doing so much work to help populations with learning and thinking differences, yet is not well known yet, which just speaks to, I think, the world of opportunity. And one thing I respect so much about the organization is you don't only just talk the talk, you certainly are embracing the learning and difference workforce in your own organization. Can you tell us about that and how do you support those with learning and thinking differences in the organization?
Yeah. So we have about 120 employees, and a third of them identify as having a learning and thinking difference. They self-identify that way. And we're very proud about the fact that that we have people coming to work every day who are living the lives of the people who we are trying to reach. So our diverse talent and lived experiences of our teams help us to inform what we do. And it helps us be even more effective and try to be as accessible as possible. And we think, as you mentioned, it's very important that we walk the talk. So our support of neurodivergent employees comes in 3 different ways. So I want to tell you a little bit about each one. So first and foremost, our inclusive office design at our headquarters here in the West Village. We provide a truly inclusive and accessible environment for our folks. And to do this, we took the liberty of using our roster of experts to consult with our architect to design our space so that we could try and maximize the space as much as possible. So we did this by creating spaces that are engineered to minimize noise and to optimize lighting. We've incorporated quiet zones as well as collaborative spaces, including adaptive furniture types to accommodate various needs, different textures, different sizes. And we have furniture for large group as well as small group settings. So that's one way. The second way is our culture. For us, it begins with the hiring process. We try to include language in our job descriptions to make sure that our role descriptions are clear and very accessible. We ensure that candidates feel supported throughout the interview process by doing things like providing application materials in alternative formats based upon self preferences that we might find out, through the interview process, large print, electronic formats, accessible screen readers, all those things to try and help people be as successful as possible when they're seeking employment with us. We also give candidates an overview of the interview process, a very detailed overview, including who they will be meeting with and the kind of conversations that they'll be having. So again, so that they are as prepared as possible. From an employee offerings perspective, which is the third way that we try to walk the talk, we have an annual Day of Understanding. DOU, we call it, and we're very proud about it, right? It helps us foster an inclusive culture. So it's a company-wide interactive workshop that grounds our employees in our mission so that we're able to foster even, more around empathy and inclusion. We try to hear from families and individuals that we are impacting so that we know and get a constant reminder about how our work is impacting others. So we bring in our customers for our days of understanding. And then something that's really new and very exciting that I wanted to share is I'm very excited about our first self-ID survey. We just launched it. We'll be sharing the information with our employees on tomorrow. So this is really new.
Mhm.
But we did this self-ID survey so that we could better understand our employees so that we can better meet their needs. It was a confidential survey, and it allows us to learn who our employees are and what they need. And the information also can help us, break down barriers, especially relating to neurodiversity. So, and by better understanding our workforce, we can test and learn some different strategies, right, in terms of what works and what doesn't work, so that we really try to walk the talk.
That's amazing. And talking about your employee experience and how you support your workforce seems so applicable to workplaces at large, really thinking about the individual at the heart of the employee experience, what they
Yeah.
need, and how they can be successful. And one thing I have heard Nathan Freeman, who's the co-president of understood.org, talk about designing for the edges is also designing for all. And I just love that philosophy so
Mhm.
much. It really is so inclusive across all of the audiences that you serve. And you do serve many different audiences. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about the different audiences that you are providing services for and more deeply understanding.
Yeah. So Understood's been around for about 12 years, and we've always focused on children, right? And their caregivers. So that includes parents, teachers, and pediatricians. We know that early intervention is very important. And so we have a wealth of resources and interventions for children and their families, first and foremost. We recently expanded our audience to include adults with a keen focus on women. Women, because we know that moms are the primary audience who visit our website on behalf of their children with learning and thinking differences. Secondly, we know that women are much more likely to be underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and some don't even receive a diagnosis until in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Some women realize that they have the same symptoms as their child when they're advocating for their child to get a diagnosis. And so through our women's initiative, we're working to raise awareness, to advance research, and to develop as many resources as we can that are curated for women with learning and thinking differences. Like we have a podcast called Misunderstood, and it really has made a phenomenal jumping off point into us launching our women's network. And what's important to keep in mind for the advertising industry is that 50% of your workforce is women. So out there, you have women with learning and thinking differences that may be struggling silently at work.
Mhm. I mean, that's part of the inspiration for this conversation for sure. And not to mention that ADHD Awareness Month is a great example of more awareness about neurodiversity in recent years. More information about women not being diagnosed or being misdiagnosed, and yet such an important workforce, not just in the advertising industry, but certainly in workforces at large. What do you attribute to kind of this increased awareness about neurodiversity, and how do we harness this energy in a way that we can make progress together?
Yeah, so we think about two things, right? First, social media's influence on
Hmm.
neurodiversity awareness. Social media has been a powerful tool in raising awareness about neurodiversity. It's become a platform where people can share their personal stories and their experiences about having a learning and thinking difference and gain support from others on their individual journeys. For example, we did some research, our neurodiversity and social media study, and we found that 50% of Americans believe social media has impacted attitudes and perceptions around neurodivergence, with 30% saying that social media helped them feel more comfortable about their situation
Hmm.
after seeing others talk about their situations on social media. So, these are some conversations that lead to self-discovery, right? In a very comfortable place for some people like social media. Second, hybrid work and
Mm.
this ever continuous conversation about return to work. Um, so the rise of remote work during the past few years just gave people in general, and particularly people with learning and thinking differences, a chance to better balance their personal and their professional demands, which led
Hmm.
to increased self-awareness around neurodiversity. With this flexibility, many people began to explore how to optimize their working styles, right?
Yeah.
And noticing patterns about how they focus, how they process information, and how they manage tasks. Much more
Hmm.
keener than they did before.
Hmm. Hmm. That's great. I mean, I think that that's one learning that I don't think we talk about really in terms of return to office. Most of the time, the conversation about return to office is full of controversy, and full of more kind of a compliance-driven conversation, as we talked about in our prep. But the self-learning about what's effective for you as an individual in how you work and how you create, I think is such an important aspect of return to work, because in a workplace, in particular in an advertising industry, everything kind of works similarly, in a similar pace, in similar ways, especially working in a team environment. But when you have a learning and thinking difference, you're going to be challenged in a way, in particular in a workplace. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. So for someone who doesn't have a learning and thinking difference, how does it show up in the workplace? How do we better understand what those challenges are?
Yeah. So I think there's three things, or we think there's three things. One
Mhm,
is executive functioning. So for someone with ADHD, workplace challenges are often related to this thing called executive functioning skills, which is how you organize things, how you focus, and how you manage your time. So routine tasks may feel overwhelming. For
mhm,
example, feeling frustrated when tasks take longer, or you don't go about it as planned. You get sort of off your game, missing deadlines or constantly feeling like you might be behind, getting easily distracted, setting, and maybe trying to start a task and you struggle to complete it. So think about someone in the agency world who
mhm,
has to complete a timesheet every day. Something like
mm,
that, something that most people may seem is very simple. One may struggle with that.
mhm,
And then second, is the whole notion of stigma and the reality that stigma still exists around learning and thinking differences. So many
mhm.
people choose not to talk about it at all at
Yeah.
work. And they don't ask for accommodations. They just do what we call masking, right?
Mhm,
They may
mhm.
do what we call masking because they're struggling. And it can be exhausting if you think about it,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And it can contribute to burnout. So if you think about a person who has ADHD, you're having a conversation with them and you think they're tracking along with you because they're smiling and they may be nodding and giving you positive signals that they're following along. But because of their ability to attend to the conversation, they may have tuned out. And
Mhm.
so, fast forward, they're secretly working late into the nighttime to overcompensate for having to go back and figure out how to keep themselves on on task, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, just things as simple as being able to focus can be a challenge.
Yeah. And it having worked with those who I have made the assumption around learning and thinking differences, I think sometimes it translates as unfortunately into performance issues, which is a sad, sad place to be when if it was more welcoming to disclose and get the help that you needed, the individual might thrive in a totally different way, in a totally different setting, or in a different kind of team environment. Yet there's such a stigma around disclosure and a misunderstanding from the employer side around accommodations, what that means, how expensive or not expensive it is. What's your take on what we can be doing better? Is the idea of someone feeling so under supported in a workplace is detrimental to the future of productivity, to the future of employee experience, employee engagement, all of the great measures that I think is important to a healthy workplace. So, what can we be doing better or doing differently for the population with learning and thinking differences?
Yeah. I think, first and foremost, specifically to your industry, the advertising industry, there's a research gap, you know,
Hmm.
and that's something that we're looking into, and we really want to partner with you to make sure that we are working closely to help you and the team be able to identify specifics, right? But having
Hmm.
said that, there's a lot of existing research that suggests creative industries over-index on neurodivergent people, and that might be your superpower. right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and here's why, because neurodivergent individuals, they can help solve complex problems. They can strengthen creativity. They can bring fresh ideas to new business pitches. In the agency world, neurodivergent individuals may leverage a keen attention to detail, which promotes insight building, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, they may deliver high quality work in an accelerated pace because of their ability to hyper focus.
Yeah.
And so, it's the kind of thing where when you know you can do better, right? And you just have to find out strategies to be able to identify who those people are so that you can take advantage and leverage the superpowers that they may have.
Yeah. And I love the discussion and the reframing about it as a superpower because every individual, whether you have a learning and thinking difference or not, is bringing some kind of superpower to the
Mhm.
team. And it changes the team dynamic when you can identify what those things are, as opposed to it being, a conversation behind closed doors that feels a little bit, kind of crossing privacy lines and things like that. But if we create spaces where we can have conversations about our superpowers or the environments where we work best, really, I think changes the opportunity for everybody to thrive in a different way. And I love so much the idea of kind of how physical spaces impact that, how even something as simple as a pre read can charge somebody's superpower in a different way. And we're facing kind of the future of this, just thinking about the research that you have showing 50% of Gen Z will be neurodiverse or will identify as neurodivergent. In many ways, this is about a conversation that's so critical to the future of work. It's beyond the individual, it's about process, it's about business productivity, it's about contribution to the economy. Yet, not enough people, if many at all, are talking about it or tapping into it. So, how do we think about it from a business perspective on how we support our employees with various ways of working? How we think about productivity and different measures of productivity now. And in other words, harnessing the superpower in teams. Is this how we should be thinking about it? Or kind of from your perspective, are there ways that we should approach this, I think, next generation of workforce?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a lot to say there. First of all, let me just touch on your point about the advertising industry
Hmm.
and some of the things that might be critical for you all to think about. So
Yeah.
first, from a talent um, perspective, in the US alone, there's nearly 40 million working adults between the ages of, like, say, 18 to 64 who are neurodivergent. So there is a talent pool out there. And then
40
secondarily,
million.
40
Wow.
million.
That's a
Yeah.
huge, huge
Yeah.
number.
And then secondarily, when you couple that with the consumer side of the business, we partnered with Kantar,
Hmm.
and we found that this population is very influential to the tune of $1.9 trillion in annual disposable income from a global perspective. Now, that's global, but
Hmm.
that means that neurodivergent consumers are a huge untapped market, right?
Sure.
And for you all in the advertising space to be able to serve that market, you need to have neurodivergent talent to bring their lived experiences into the work,
Hmm.
right? So that's
Hmm.
so that's something to think about, from the perspective of being able to tap into the talent. On the side about, this whole notion of challenging at work and what's my take on that, there's something about misrepresentation and understanding from a that contribute to stigma that
Hmm.
I think, impacts people at work, right?
Mm.
And so our 2024 workplace study, we found that, listen to this, 59% of neurodivergent individuals, they worry that disclosing their diagnosis at work will have a negative impact on their career, right?
Mm. Mhm.
59 worry about the impact if they talk about it at work. But on the flip side, the same research revealed that 80%, more than 80% of people agree that accommodations at work make the workplace better for everyone. So it's that dichotomy of
Yeah.
really bringing the conversation into the culture. And
Mm-hmm.
if you talk about it, it will become a open issue, right? It will
Mm-hmm.
become something that can be positive and not always something that is deemed as being negative. I sometimes think about it, from a DEIB perspective, been at this game, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And race, ethnicity, and gender for so long was the conversation. And
Yeah.
just sometimes talking about it at work brought richer conversations about
Yeah.
the positive, right? That we have far more in common than we have from a being different perspective. And so
Yep.
if you bring neurodiversity into that equation as well, that could be something, from a positive perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Also, I think prioritizing and raising awareness will also help foster a culture where accommodations are seen not as burdens, but as tools.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't know about someone having a challenge, you certainly can't fix it. But once you know, you have to do better.
Yeah.
And so, I often say instead of waiting around for employees to disclose, proactively ask people about their situations
Mm-hmm.
because a reasonable accommodation should be available, to everybody. And in studies, that we've participated in and that we have sponsored, many accommodations are free or less than $500.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
you think about it, a free accommodation could be, depending on the job or the type of work that someone is doing, a little flexibility can go a long way to ease the
Mm-hmm.
burden for someone who has ADHD, or at a very low cost, just offering everybody in an open office environment noise controlling headphones.
Yes.
It,
Yeah.
it helps everybody and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
cost that much money to proactively do that and show employees that you really, really care about them.
Yeah. And I feel like there's always, or maybe not always, but the conversations around accommodations or supporting individuals and their individual needs often brings up a conversation of, well, if we do this for this employee, what do we do when other people ask for X, Y, and Z? I feel like that's part of the conundrum that employers often face relative to provide responding to requests, the budget related to that, etc. But what I'm hearing you say is that reasonable accommodations should be provided to everybody depending on their situation. Am I hearing that correctly?
I think that, and when we say reasonable accommodations, there's certainly medical accommodations that,
Hmm.
that people absolutely need. And their medical providers say that in order for them to be productive at work, these are some things that are necessary. Let's set those to the side, right?
Sure.
But
Hmm.
in talking about, working in an open office environment, offering people the opportunity for quiet spaces and offering people the opportunity to have noise controlling headphones is just good business practice.
Hmm.
Whether you want to coin it or call it an accommodation or not but it's not really, because if you're in an open office space, everybody could could be struggling to pay attention
Sure.
if there's a lot of noise around. So I think, just from the perspective of understanding the population of people that you have, the more you understand the population, the better you can do in terms of being proactive.
Hmm.
And then in terms of the point that you made about performance, I think, it becomes important to really understand that truly needing an accommodation in the workplace is a very different conversation than workplace performance.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, if you think about it from the perspective of being proactive, it makes sense to um, see what you can do ahead of time, right?
Hmm.
Proactively versus waiting around for a performance issue to happen, and then you have to figure out how to fix it. And
Mhm.
that's just in general, right?
Yeah,
Right. That's just
absolutely.
good practice in general. So, we do a lot of training to really help our managers to have, you know, great conversations and
Mhm.
offer encouragement in terms of how to give and receive feedback so that
Mhm.
everyone is mindful about caring about people and being as empathetic as you can to everybody,
Mhm.
not just, people with learning and thinking differences, but just how to manage better in general.
Right. At the core of it, it really is around helping an individual thrive. And
Mhm.
I love what you said in terms of being proactive. And then there are some situations where you do need to be reactive to an individual's situation. And in terms of proactivity, I've heard a couple of things related to physical space, lighting, soft seating, group seating, individual areas, headphones for noisy work environments. What are some other ways that we can help and be proactive so that we're kind of helping the overall population thrive while also individually supporting those who have learning and thinking differences? Are there other things that we should be prioritizing? Are there other interventions or tools that we should be aware of and start thinking about now?
I think, things that are simple, right? I'm all about trying to keep it as simple as possible. And if you think about, you know, what you can do today, what you can do tomorrow, and what you can do in the future, right?
Hmm.
So some of the things that people can do today is right now, everyone listening to this podcast can go out to our website, understood.org, and find all kinds of resources for themselves individually or resources that they can share with others that might can help somebody else. So that's one thing. You can immediately do that. Other things is, sending pre-reads that recap notes after you have a meeting, just being conscious that it's just good practice to do that. Offer different options for breaks during longer presentations, right? Thinking about how you can leverage AI using recording and note taking. And
Hmm.
proactively doing that, saying, I'm going to record this meeting or I'm going to use this note taking so that it's out there and that there's no surprises. Trying to adapt materials from an accessibility perspective and thinking about the kind of font sizes, the kind of colors, right? The kind
Hmm.
of designs, so that it's accessible friendly for everyone to use.
Hmm.
And then again, just thinking about reasonable accommodations that clarify and give people, access to the tools that they need. Something as simple as moving a desk from a dim area over to a lighted area or away from an elevator bank or, just things like that that can go a long way
Hmm.
to encourage people.
Hmm.
And then, allowing someone with a learning and thinking difference to work from home one
Hmm.
additional day per week could go a long way if it's recommended by their medical doctor. Those are
Hmm.
things that we could do today
Hmm.
that are simple. Some of the things to think about, for tomorrow or later is how to create ERGs that focus on neurodiversity, as a way to get people together to again in the workplace proactively talk about it more and let people share their stories to the level that they are comfortable.
Hmm.
Um, Things like celebrating ADHD and Learning Disability Awareness Month, right? That
Hmm.
could go a long way for providing education to people. Um, Enhancing the recruitment process. I talked about this a little bit, but evolving job descriptions to really think about your recruiting practices, and to making sure that you're that you have interview training so that hiring managers and people that are on interview pools are doing the best they can and are certainly aware of some best practices if and when they are interviewing someone who might have a learning and thinking difference. And then proactively ask candidates up front if they need or if they could benefit from some kind of accommodation. That's what we
Mm-hmm.
do. That way, you know, right? You know
Mm-hmm.
up front what the person needs in order to be successful. And then finally, into the future, more longer term things.
Yeah.
Think about adjusting personal development plans. Think about scheduling blocks of focus time for developing reviews. We recently had a heads down day where we revamped our performance management program where we did quarterly check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
Heads down day. We gave people time and space to be heads down so you could focus on writing your own self-assessment, right? Or if you manage people, writing up feedback that you're going to share, but really thinking about it and being mindful about it.
Mm.
Also, another thing that can go a long way is offering employees the opportunity to volunteer, right? To do some external in the community
Mm-hmm.
uh, volunteering work that is specific to neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
We've done a lot. We've launched what we call You Learn, and it's our learning and development program.
Mm.
And we're doing all kinds of, business skills training, giving and receiving feedback. We have a whole manager curriculum. And then we also have, as part of that, training for people on accessibility, right? We do a
Mm-hmm.
lot of work here. What does accessible work look like? And
Mm-hmm.
we bring in our experts to help us with that. We do accommodation training to make sure that everybody in the organization knows what's legally being said out there, and
Mm-hmm.
how are we operationalizing that within understood. And I mean, I could keep going on, setting business goals as part of your operating plan around neurodivergent team members,
Mm-hmm.
tracking the progress and talking about it. And when I say setting goals, I mean, you know, g- growing into lofty goals, but starting with things that you know you can achieve as a team or as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, really small stuff that when you accomplish it, it makes
Mm-hmm.
people feel good, right?
Right.
But set the
Absolutely.
bar kind of low to get started so that you can be successful, and then raise the bar as you grow, because as you know more, you do better.
I mean, a business goal could be as simple as ensuring that every meeting has a pre-read so that people can
Yep,
process the information. That, although
that's
it
right.
seems like a simple task, is actually quite a
That's right.
organizational
For
change
that
in
team
terms of
meetings have
behavior.
agendas,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and that you've
Absolutely.
got time limits on those. And when you're approaching the time, you're respectful and you move on to the next topic. Just small things, right? Yeah, but you're
Absolutely.
you're exactly right. And get into the habit of making that part of what you do, you
That's
know.
right. I'm so inspired by all of the things that you have listed that are both kind of right now, all the way to in the future, that they touch upon both inclusive practices that change individual behaviors and the way individual feels in an organization or fosters belonging, all the way to equitable practices like job descriptions, like hiring practices, like performance reviews. And it's so important that we're thinking both individually and at the organizational level, because that's how we're going to support an individual fully across kind of how they interact, but also how their opportunities are shaped exactly the same way as others. And it's so inspiring in sort of the thoughtfulness around that, the work that you do at Understood and all the your employees really focus on from a mission standpoint. And there's one thing that I learned as I was lucky enough to do a tour at the office where individuals process information with, they need 7 seconds to process information. And I do think about that now. I am naturally fast talker, as you can hear, but I am much more conscious of that, knowing that that stat is like floating around in my head when I do presentations, that I take a deep breath and I slow down. And that's how I'm thinking about it from an individual perspective. All to say is that we can all do our part in a way that feels natural for us to contribute to the thriving of somebody else. But yet, from an organizational perspective, team perspective, culture perspective, there's so much more that we can do. So I appreciate you sharing that. I have one biggish question to end on in today's conversation. And that question is, if you look ahead 5 years, what do you see for those with learning and thinking differences?
So yeah, that's a good question. So I would say in 2022, we did some research and we found that 55% of parents with neurodivergent children are afraid to tell others that their child has a learning and thinking difference because of stigma. So
Hmm.
looking ahead, Cathy,
Yeah.
I see stigma, going this way,
Yeah.
right? And really having a world where individuals can advocate for themselves and to help other people, right? And
Absolutely.
then for understood as an organization, I see our impact continuing to go this way. So
Hmm.
stigma goes this way and our impact goes this way.
Yeah.
Because as of this year, we have looked at how our content is impacting our users, and 23% say that they have increased in terms of their overall well-being. 9% say they have an increase just in hope for themselves. And then 100% of our users feel that our tools and our resources have been helpful for them. And so, looking ahead into the future, I just want more of that. I want those numbers to go up. While I know we can't do better than 100% of our users finding our content to be helpful, we certainly can think about, spreading the awareness and making sure that they're doing something. You find it helpful, so then you're taking action and you're doing something. You're telling somebody else,
Absolutely.
and more people are continuing to visit our site.
I love
So
the
that's what I
multiplier
hope.
effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. I am all in on supporting your vision, on Understood's vision, and to be a partner to continue to help support this community, and to create workplaces where individuals have what they need to thrive. That's part of the reason why I'm so excited about these conversations with Talent Talks. That's part of the reason why I want to continue our conversation. I want to be respectful of your time, though. But I think we need to think about this as just an initiation into this conversation, and the fact that we're here talking about ADHD Awareness Month, I think is significant and it's important, and we need to continue this great work together. So, Deb, thank you so much for your time here. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm certain our listeners will as well. And we'll continue to do great work together to help individuals in this community thrive. Thank you so much for being part of Talent Talks, brought to you from 4A's and the 4A's Foundation. Tune in next month to hear from leaders who are focused on creating inclusive and equitable workplaces.